touch, but now feeling like I'm born again. I've been coming alive, I've been coming alive again. Finally seeing the light, finally seeing the light ahead. I'm breaking out of the night, breaking into the day instead. I was living out the tea life, living out of touch, but now feeling like I'm born again. Finally seeing the light, finally seeing the light ahead.
Hey, everybody. Oh, gotta fix that. Boom. Hey, everybody. Sorry, I'm late for some of you. If you're checking in, do me a favor, just leave me a comment. Let me know where you are. Really good stuff tonight. Tough topics. I'm sorry I missed you guys last week. It's been, I've been sitting on some topics, and then sure enough, the Olympics start, and then things kind of get weird. And so we're going to talk about some stuff tonight. It's going to be a little, not controversial, but I just want to remind everybody that, I work with aspiring athletes and their families, right? So these are athletes that are all in kind of either on their Olympic dream, their professional dream, just their athletic dream, their collegiate dream, whatever it is. So the advice is not for everybody. Okay. So the advice is not for everybody. And being an Olympian, having been a Division I recruit, things like that, having worked with a lot of athletes since then, I have a fair bit of experience here, just being around a unique set of individuals. And so what ends up happening with a unique set of individuals is that when they get to when they're in the media's eye, the media is designed, and what people need to understand is that the media now, especially now, is designed to sell eyeballs. I had a girlfriend years ago who worked in internet ad sales in New York City. Went from like basically an admin assistant to a sales exec in like 3 months, making like six figures, just going from zero to, everything in a short amount of time, because it's such a lucrative business. And that was like 20 some odd years ago, 25. But the idea is that, what you see and hear in the media is not always the full picture, right? So, and usually what the story is wrapped in a paper, like it's wrapped in a very appealing paper, right? So imagine like it's Christmas, and and you come down the stairs and Santa came and all of a sudden there's presents under the Christmas tree. And, there's always those presents that are wrapped in that cool paper. And you're like, yeah, I want that. I want to open that one first. Right. Whereas that other one that's kind of like in the recycled paper that your, mom got from CVS, like whatever, they're not nearly as exciting. But I want to talk tonight about some topics that are especially in the media now. And one of them, the Naomi Osaka, which is in segment 2, I'm going to talk. Like I had started to talk about that last week, and then I waited, and then now she went to the Olympics and she didn't make it, and whatever, yada yada. She got knocked down the third round. She was supposed to win gold. We're going to talk about that, right? And so, and also, I realized I titled that one a little harshly, but I think if you listen to this all the way through, and whether you're watching the replay, which I'm sure the replay is going to offend a lot of people, if you listen all the way to the end, just let me know before you leave a comment so that we have some good discussion on this, because we're going to talk about some stuff that is not really in the press right now. So let's start with the first topic for today. And of course, I didn't do my banners up. Dang it. I was in a huge rush. So let's get this going. So the first topic is going to be what elite coaches are saying privately about mental health, this mental health discussion. Okay. And so we're going to start that here, showing that. Okay. So, one of the things that I get to do is, I've got coaching friends in a variety of sports, and it's really kind of fascinating. So during Wimbledon, I was actually messaging a friend of mine who's at Wimbledon, working with an athlete in Wimbledon, and this athlete did very well at Wimbledon. And this was about the time the whole Naomi Osaka thing was kind of kicking into play. And for those of you that don't know what happened with Naomi Osaka, so Naomi Osaka is the highest paid female athlete in the world. Okay. I can't remember if at the time she was the number 1 tennis player in the world and then dropped to number 2, or if she's number 2 then, whatever. But what happened was, so she's at the French Open and she decides to skip out on a press conference, and so she gets fined, and which is a rule in international in professional tennis. You have media requirements as dictated by the association. So pretty much, if you're like one of the top players in the world, you're doing press conferences fairly frequently. And in any sport, like the people who are on that beat, they're interviewing the athletes a lot, right? So, and sometimes there's relationships there. They know each other, and the athletes understand that the press is doing a job. The press understands the athletes are doing a job. There's a level of respect, but sometimes there's also a level of disrespectful questions. I love, for those of you guys watching Ted Lasso now on Apple TV, there's this guy like Trent Crimm from The Independent, and he's a bit of an ass, but Ted Lasso knows he's got a job to do, and Trent Crimm knows he's got a job to do, and there's a professional relationship there. So anyway, so Naomi Osaka skips out on the press conference, and then she gets fined, and she says that basically when she goes to her press conferences, she's quite introverted, and some of the questions raise doubt, in her head. Now, if you look at any athlete in any sport, and sometimes you hear some of the questions, some of the questions are like, hey, when it's a full moon, you tend to like totally tank. Why is that? Right? Or, it's Thursday after like free lunch in the cafeteria and you tend to bonk, or, when your opponent's wearing purple, right? And so these are things that as an athlete, it's hard enough to think about these things on your own. Like when I went to the Olympics, the fall before we went to the Olympics, we had one of our athletes got attacked by neo-Nazi skinheads in Germany, and it was it was the first documented attack of an American by neo-Nazi skinhead in Germany. And the next day we got like ushered out by a police escort we went to Austria, and then the next day like People magazine was there, like grilling us. And we had a Jewish kid on the team. We had a black kid on the team. Rob Pipkins. Duncan Kennedy was our top athlete. Got his face kicked in by a bunch of drunk neo-Nazi skinheads at this bar, and it was weird. And I remember, like that year we went through media training because the press was like, hey, all over, they're going to ask you weird questions about that. And also that Olympics was the Tanya Harding, Nancy Kerrigan Olympics, by the way. And so we went through media training to understand how to deal with that, what the press are going to ask you, how to answer them, how to deflect a question. This is a skill that all athletes learn. And Naomi Osaka basically said, like, I don't like it. I'm not going to do it. I'm done. And then all of the major tennis events, the four major tennis events, the French Open, Wimbledon, US Open, British, Australian Open, they're all like, no, like you've got to do it or else we're going to fine you or you get disqualified. And that's where she said, like, no, like, I've battled depression and I have mental health issues around this and it causes me anxiety, grief and anxiety. And when I heard that, I was like, oh no, and I talked about this a bunch of weeks ago. I was like, athletes are going to ruin the discussion around mental health. And so I got on the horn to some friends of mine who are who are in tennis, going like, well, what do you think about this? And every one of them was like, all right, she says she's introverted, but she's on the cover of Time magazine. The other thing I heard was like, she says she's introverted, but she was more than willing to talk to the press when she was talking about like Black Lives Matter and things that mattered to her. And so just like when we went to the Olympics and we had athletes that were, I remember like Gordy Shear, he's Jewish and this was a big deal to him. And there was this like, not tension, but there was this like, hey, we're teammates. We want to support Gordy. But the idea was like, we were all trying to make an Olympic team, man. And sometimes it was this idea of like, hey, that's going to be your fight, but we've got to focus on what we got to deal with. Right. And that was not out of, no love for our teammate. It was just out of like focus and battles and things like that. And so one of the things that I kept hearing from the coaches that I talked to inside of tennis and outside of tennis was this idea of like, all right, listen, she can opt out, but for any competitor that was behind her in the rankings, which is pretty much everybody, they were pretty excited that she wasn't there. Right. And then she decided not to go to Wimbledon, and the players competing were like, hey, we're good. Like she can do her thing. We deal with press. We deal with press conferences all the time. What I thought was kind of ironic to this was like, so she's not new to tennis, right? Like she's been an elite tennis player since like 2016. And so she's dealt with the press a lot. And I get that, that press conferences can be uncomfortable. We've probably all heard questions asked by the media that are pretty cringy. And so, but as a sport, one of the things that's really interesting to understand is that it's those moments that we learn about an athlete that we really love a sport. And the sports know that, right? Tennis knows that. NFL knows that. Baseball knows that. Well, baseball does a kind of crappy job of it, but hockey knows it. Every sport knows that, hey, like, yeah, the fans like tennis or the fans like snowboarding or ping pong, but really what they love is the story behind the athlete. Okay. I learned that when I went to the 92 Olympics as an alternate that, the people like the story. That's why the NBC coverage for those of you in the United States is so like, oh, it's like everybody's story. And like this athlete lost like, 18 grandparents and their sister to cancer. And this guy got struck by lightning and you name it, there's a story, and her dog died. And then she got like a stray. It's like, oh my God, a stray dog. Like it's just like, we love the stories. So, so as a sport, the sport needs the athletes to do the press conferences, but the athletes also use the press, especially now, to their benefit, right? Like to basically share the things that are important to them. And we have this thing now called like activist athletes, which I've got to take on that, but I'm not going to get today. But the idea here is that first, as we discuss this, okay, before people like chop off my head for having this discussion, I want to share with you a Walt Whitman quote, which was actually, in Ted Lasso. For those of you guys who watch Ted Lasso, it's this idea of be curious, not judgmental. Okay. One of the things that's happening right now especially now that I'm recording this, Simone Biles has like opted out of the team competition and then basically opted out of the Olympics for mental health reasons. The media has totally jumped on the mental health side of things. However, what I'm going to talk about today a little bit is that in the second section is about like why that's not really the whole story. Okay. but so as you listen to me, I want you to be curious, not judgmental. So there's a lot of people right now with Naomi Osaka and with Simone Biles who are very judgmental. Okay. So one of the things that comes to mind is this idea like, oh, Simone Biles is being selfish for not competing and not helping the US team win gold. Well, that's true. There is a degree of truth to that. Now, if it comes out of some like racist dude in the South who's God bless American apple pie, I can see how that could be offensive to some. But really, as a teammate, there's some truth to that. Okay. But overall, one of the things that I want people to understand um, is that among elite coaches, who, by the way, I wouldn't put any of the elite coaches that I've talked to in some sort of like hard ass, um, un, what's the, uh, um, they're not dicks, right? Let's put it that way. But the idea is that as a whole, the community kind of feels like this mental health conversation has gotten out of hand, and it's now being used in. And I shared this story a couple weeks ago. I had heard from um, uh, a person in a field that I respect, and they were working with an athlete, and the athlete was coming across as unrelatable to their audience. And this person was trying to get sponsorship for this athlete. And what ended up happening is that the in an effort to be relatable to a larger audience, they wanted to show some of the cracks in the foundation of this athlete so they didn't look so perfect. And they jumped on the mental health bandwagon and used that as a way to further their exposure, right? They got picked up in all these different things and what yada. So you may not like that. You may think that that's not possible, but I'm here to tell you that it is. Right. So I always find it interesting. They'll be like, oh, that athlete did, not this particular athlete, but athletes do illegal drugs. Oh, they don't do anything else bad in their life. Well, this is one of those things. You know, athletes now have an incredible opportunity, like with social media, to to um, to really reach new heights. And I'm going to talk about this in the section second. But what all my elite coach friends will say is that, but they'll say this, they can't say this publicly because right now the mental health conversation is so like, it's just like everybody has depression, everybody has mental health. Like if you talk anything about that, like mental health issues, if anybody talks negatively about that, like, oh, you're like crazy, you're gonna get crucified. Like it's nuts. So, but the idea is that topic right now drives a lot of eyeballs, right? And with the Olympics happening right now, there's all these eyeballs around athletes, and there are people, marketing companies, marketing people who are going to use that story because it's a hot topic. It's no different than if it was, let's say the world got excited about underwater basket weaving, and there's like an Olympic athlete, and they did some underwater basket weaving. That's going to be the lead story, right? Why? Because it's the hot topic right now. Okay, so the idea is that topics drive eyeballs, topic eyeballs drive traffic drives revenue and exposure, or drives exposure, which drives revenue, and then it's a thing. So all of my elite coaching friends will tell you that this mental health conversation has gotten out of hand, because what used to be butterflies is now anxiety. Right? It's been like that for a couple of years now. It's just getting more and more perpetuated. And what happens is as a society, especially with social media, is social media works in basically a negative loop. It gives you more of what you're interested in. So if you see a Simone Biles, article right now, and um, it's about mental health issues, and then you may get an ad for mental health issues. You may get an ad for, like, depending on where you live, for medication, helping with anxiety or depression or things like that. It feeds that, and that's just getting more and more intense, right? Like we've known about that now for a couple of years, but it's just getting more and more intense. So social media feeds negativity loops. And what we are as a society is we are very susceptible to well-written headlines that drive more traffic. I did a Facebook post today about, this, it was a CNN headline, and it was like, white male talking heads question Simone Biles's courage. Now, there were some white talking heads out there who were like, there's this comedian dude who's driving, says some pretty horrible stuff, and he's just driving eyeballs to himself, right? But if you look past that and you go like, okay, wait a second, what's really going on here? The idea is that elite coaches understand that mental health has always been a thing, but it hasn't been labeled as such, right? An athlete has expectations about their performance and heaps pressure on themselves. Well, that hasn't changed. That's the same as it's always been. But the media is like, oh, social media is like, the world's piling pressure on athletes more than ever, and Simone Biles even said that, like, oh, the pressure was too much. Well, that's all, pressure is heaped on yourself, right? Like there's no physical, you're not carrying a weight, and your words matter. And so, what elite coaches understand is that the words you use to describe yourself is going to pretty much define your outcome, right? So if you are walking around saying like, oh, there's so much pressure on me, well, guess what? Your brain's going to give you more of that. If you are like scrolling through your social media and you're reading negative comments, well, guess what? You are going to get more of that. You're going to drive yourself into that loop. And what's happening now, what the elite coaches that I've been talking to have been messaging with, have been saying is that right now, these athletes who have quit, right, who have opted out, Simone Biles opted out, Naomi Osaka opted out. The truth is that other athletes filled those gaps, right? They competed. There was nobody the Olympics is still about to happen. Simone Biles was the gold medal favorite. Well, it's not like they're not going to give the gold medal away now. They're not just going to give silver medals away. No, there's going to be somebody that takes that gold medal position. There's somebody that is going to withstand that pressure, right? Because pressure is heaped on to ourselves. So I can't believe personally that an athlete like Naomi Osaka and an athlete like Simone Biles, who has been training for a long time, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in the next segment, but the idea, I can't believe that all of a sudden that this moment that they've been working towards, and they've been to other Olympics, except for Naomi, right? But they've been in world, for some athletes, the Olympics is actually less of a challenge than opens and things like that. I can't believe that all of a sudden it was too much, right? I can't believe all of a sudden it was too much. I'm going to talk about that more in the second segment. But what all of these elite coaches have told me, and what I fully believe, is that there's a massive opportunity now for athletes who understand what's going on and understand how to manage this stuff. And that's what's really interesting here, is that as an elite athlete, like Simone Biles can opt out because of mental health. She wants to keep herself healthy mentally, but that works for her as an elite athlete at the top of her game. But that is not the same approach that a young athlete who's like 15 can take all of a sudden. They don't have that luxury, right? They just don't have that luxury. So they can't opt out, but not like we didn't do that before. This mental health conversation is so far at the front of everything. It's just this like razor edge exposed that if anybody touches it, they're going to get cut. And if anybody comments on it, oh my God, it's like the backlash today to the backlash was just ridiculous, right? So I am encouraging you, not to be judgmental. I'm not being judgmental of Simone, but I'm being curious as to, one, the vocab being used, the psychology behind what it is she's, her approach. Maybe there's another tactic, and I'm going to cover that in the next segment, about, something else that benefited her by not competing. And that's going to drive a lot of people nuts who hear that. But the point is this, is that elite coaches will tell you mental health has always been a thing, right? And they will also encourage you that that your athlete has the tools to withstand anything. It's what we do, right? Because somebody is going to do it. What I find really interesting, and this is another kind of like key, like kind of little clue to me, Simone Biles has advanced the sport of gymnastics so much. Like she is pushing the boundaries of skills that can be done and moves that can be performed. And now all of a sudden it's too much. And she says, "Oh, I'm going to protect my mental health." I know this as a life lesson is you regret the things you don't do as opposed to things that you did do. Right. And so I believe that the message this is not about like, oh, people are like, oh, I support Simone. I support, Osaka. I support, like, I'm proud of her. What are you proud of? Are you proud of the fact that they just stood up and said maybe that, hey, they feel weird every once in a while and it causes them, but it caused them to quit? Because that's what happened here. And so what I think needs to be held in as proud or either people can look up to is this idea that, hey, as an elite athlete, they said that, hey, sometimes that they deal with, anxiety. I call them butterflies, depression, feeling bummed out. Like the problem with those two things is that depression is not the same for me as it is for Naomi Osaka, as it is for you. It's different for everybody. And the problem for our young athletes is that they go like, oh, my hero suffers from depression. Well, then when I'm feeling bad, what must that be? Right? Worse? That's not cool. And a lot of the coaches that I've talked to are worried about that message. Okay. So, so unfortunately, the way this has been wrapped and packaged, there's a little bit of distrust there in this message anymore because like the idea of that mental health is now the go-to kind of escape for something. It's like you say, "Oh, I've got mental health." It's like, no, oh, we can't say anything now to them, right? And oh, gymnastics comes out and says, "Oh, we support them unequivocally." What else are they going to say, right? They can't talk like this. But the truth is that the coaches behind the scenes are going, and I talked about this a few weeks ago. They're going like this. This is creating some athletes who are soft. Like and now people say, Jonathan, you're gaslighting athletes. No, no. Gabor Mate, Dr. Gabor Mate up in Vancouver, has a beautiful way. He talks about the saying, you should be ashamed of yourself. And so no one should ever be ashamed of themselves. You can have shame for what you did. And that's the underlying message for every athlete, in my opinion. It's like we go out and we try something and we fail. And guess what? We feel shame because we didn't succeed, right? It's a little embarrassing, it's a little whatever, but it's not who we are, it's what we did. And so when you focus about having shame about what you did, it's like, okay, that's okay. I'm still me. I'm still good. I'm still valuable. But that thing that I just did, I feel shame for that, you know? And so the message that we want our athletes to understand is this idea of like, all right, listen, you should never feel shame for what you did, even what happened to you. The idea though is that you now can have some distance between what you're going through and what needs to happen. And in the next segment, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what I kind of some angles here on the story that no one's really talking about in the media that I think are important to share. But the idea here is that elite coaches are kind of shaking their head at all this, going, "All right, the truth is that on game day, an athlete we've got to get an athlete ready to compete, and there are going to be some athletes now who opt out." There are going to be other athletes who just fill that void and say, bring it. What I find really interesting, Naomi Osaka in particular, her idol that she looked up the most to was Serena Williams. And it was a moment, a tipping point where she actually beat Serena. and won the Open and got a chance to say, like, wow, I hope someday that I get to compete and some girl watching me gets to compete against me. That's Serena Williams was brilliant at using the media at dealing with the media. She still is. She used it for good. She used it for, to help herself and help her sponsors and help promote any messages she wanted to promote. That is a skill, right? And all of this is learnable. Not, like, I remember when my wife was pregnant with with my son Quinn, and the midwife said, "You're not going to be given any pain that you can't withstand," right? And that's really the truth. That's really the truth. When an athlete opts out of an event, that's a permanent solution to a temporary problem, right? That decision will linger for that athlete's entire career, and that's a problem. Okay, that's unfortunate. And so, as coaches, as parents, as other athletes, we need to just support our teammate and go, but also the athlete themselves is responsible for developing the resources with which to survive these things, because another athlete will replace them. And that's just the way athletes work, or that's the way sports work. I talked about that a few weeks ago. I said, sports doesn't care about your mental health. And it's true. The Olympics didn't stop for Naomi Osaka. It didn't stop, or Wimbledon didn't stop for Naomi Osaka. The Olympics didn't stop for Simone Biles. It's still going on. Russia won the team. We'll see who wins the individual, right? And yeah, it's so it's just know that if you're dealing with an elite coach, that you can have good discussions with them around this topic, because they really want to help your athlete be world class. They might not have all the skills with which to teach them, right? That's why, like, I do the work that I do, is because I really find a void there. There's a lot of coaches there that are really good technically, good tactically, but they're not good at, like, this stuff, right? And they come across as harsh or tough or whatever. And that's a skill set that not a lot of coaches have, right? So, but just know that your coaches want you to be ready for anything, right? And so, reach out to them and have that conversation. So if that makes sense to everybody, do me a favor, like, hit the like button. Be sure to share this with anybody that needs to hear it. And just know, again, don't be judgmental of what I just told you either. Be curious and go, like, okay, there's more to this. Let's go. All right. So be curious, not judgmental. All right. All right. So let's move to the next topic. So this one's a little harshly titled. I apologize for that. So why Naomi Osaka is not an athletic role model anymore. Okay. I've been sitting on this topic ever since she withdrew from the French Open and then withdrew from Wimbledon. And since then, what ended up happening was she withdrew from Wimbledon, and then she was just going to focus on the Olympics because she's of Japanese heritage. She competes under the Japanese flag. They gave her she lit the Olympic torch, which I thought was a little over the top. She had just been in Time magazine. After saying that she was introverted and didn't like the press, she's on the cover of Time magazine, and people are like, "Oh my God, Naomi's amazing! Like, I love her. Like, my daughter just loves her, whatever." And I was just like, "Oh man, this is not totally right message." So she goes to Tokyo. She lights the cauldron, but then she gets bumped in the third round of tennis of an event that she was supposed to win, right? And so the expectations were there, and in the articles about her, talking about her expectations, she's heaped on a lot of pressure. And one thing that's a little complicated here, interesting comment here. This country is getting soft and is praising people who quit. Sad. What's next? Inspirational Disney movies where everyone cheers the quitter. Crazy. Yeah, it's getting there. I don't disagree with that at all. I do think but you can't talk about that publicly, right? But we're going to talk about some stuff in this one, in this section, which will be interesting. So Naomi Osaka, like, she's of mixed heritage. Like, her mom's Japanese, her dad's Haitian. They moved to the United States when she was 3. Then he fell in love with tennis. They moved to Florida so she could train. She becomes one of the best in the world. The dad was like infatuated with the Williams sisters, Serena and Venus, and gets her the training that she needs to succeed. And it was really good. And so what ends up happening was I have a theory about I have a theory about role models, and that is this. Let me see if I can pull this up. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to. Boink. Oh, I don't know if that's going to work. Hold on. I made up a little bit of a presentation here, but I don't know if I can pull it up right now. It's pulling up way too big. Let's try this. Bear with me for a sec. So when it comes to role models, all right, one of the things that happens with role models is that, oh, there we go. Okay. I'm going to screw this over here, put this in the corner. All right. So every athlete goes through this. Okay. Every athlete's go through this. So I got to put this up here. Okay. And so, right, a young athlete plays a sport, turns on the TV, sees an older athlete in that sport, and goes, role model, right? And so what happens is that's all well and good. Like, so you could have like a kid who's like 6 years old who gets to work with like a local high school kid, role model, right? Flips on the TV, sees a professional version of that high school kid, role model. Sees an Olympian, role model. But what's really happening is that the initial role modelship, if we can call it that, really comes down to the athletic performance of the athlete. Okay. So there's that saying, like, never meet your heroes. And I didn't fully understand that for the longest time. But I do more now, the more I do this, because what ends up happening is, for a lot of athletes, is that role model they had has some sort of transgression. And I think here in this case, the thing that is the transgression is the fact that Naomi Osaka just withdrew from the French Open. She withdrew from Wimbledon, and that was the answer to the anxiety and the said depression that she had dealing with the media. At that point, that makes you question the role modelship. And so I'm going to try to explain that a little bit, because what happened here is that the without sounding disrespectful, okay, is that athletes now are at a point where they are bigger than their sport. Okay. So Naomi Osaka talks about being introverted, right? And I get it. You can be introverted where, you know, you don't really like crowds, you might not even like people, but now all of a sudden her talent as an athlete has gotten her to a point where she's like the highest paid female athlete in the world. Like, holy smokes. You know, and a lot of athletes don't think about that when they play. They just see the role model playing and they're like, oh, I wish I could be like them someday. Okay, cool. But the primary focus is on the athletic performance. So when we look at athletes, I just want to go through this real quick. So the athletic model, so my model here for athlete success is such that we have three key abilities, right? And you might have heard me talk about this before. So, but I have a cool little graphic now to show off. So I'm going to do that. All right. So the first circle that helps create an athlete is their physical ability, right? So if your athlete falls in love with an athlete who is a prodigy, right? Now, Naomi Osaka, I had heard her referred as a prodigy, but then I realized, like, she went pro when she was like 16. She's like 20 something now. She worked like she was good when she was a junior, but you know, but that's kind of normal in tennis. And she's been, you know, slugging it out for like the last 5-6 years as a pro. So she understands like the pressures of the media. She understands, not, I wouldn't say pressures, how to navigate the media. And she's been on, you know, the cover of major magazines. That is not like hey, you show up and get your photo taken. It's like, no, there's like 12 people in a hotel room in downtown New York City for you to get a photo, right? And the hair is done and the makeup's done and like the lighting's perfect. It's a big deal. So the idea, the introverted argument to me kind of died a long time ago, right? But it's an easy out now for athletes because everybody is so sensitive to it. And I talked about that in the first segment. So if you're listening to this alone on the podcast, you kind of go to the last podcast episode, you'll see me talk about that. So the first ability for an athlete is their physical ability. All right. The second layer, the second ability is an athlete's technical ability, right? So the reason why I start with physical ability is because your athlete could walk down the street, regardless of their sport, see an athlete like on the beach in a bikini or in a bathing suit and go like, wow, there's an amazing athlete, right? There's a good body, right? That's that. And coaches do that too, right? Coaches see physical ability typically first, right? Then they see technical ability. So then as your athlete gets a little older and they start to notice like, wow, she's got a really good forehand, or she's got a good backhand, or he has really good, good form running or whatever. That's the technical ability, right? The third ability is the tactical ability. And this is where what ends up happening as we up these abilities and as we get into the layers, which are the next segment, is this is where your role model starts to break down. Okay. And so tactical ability is how an athlete uses their physical and their technical ability to then execute their sport. And so your athlete is in the middle. Now, what's interesting is that an athlete can have more tactical ability. They might have a little bit more technical ability. And in this middle, the dark area, that's the athlete as a whole, right? That's the athlete is in that middle dark area. So certain athletes have more technical ability than others. Some have less. Some athletes dominate physically, right? Some have less, right? So, but either way, your athlete is going to look at that role model and be inspired, right? Hopefully, okay. But then we add the first layer to developing those abilities. So that is resources. So your resources of time, your resources of energy, and your resources of money. Okay. So if you have a lot of money, you can invest in coaches and travel and equipment and sports psychologists and mental programs and you name it, you have resources. But you could have a lot of money, but not a lot of time to be able to do those things, right? Or you might have a lot of money, you might have a lot of time, but you might have a lot of energy, right? And so then you take some of that money and you invest in nutrition and sleep and mattresses and blackout blinds and chiropractors and massage therapists and voodoo doctors, like whatever it is for you, right? But those are your resources. Okay. So now one of the things about mentorship and about inspiration and things along and role models is that a lot of athletes never understand the resources that another athlete has to go towards. They may think that, oh, must be nice. Like, yeah, Naomi Osaka's dad, moved her from Long Island to Florida. Like, yeah, wow, that's great. I'd love to do that. That's cool. But you don't realize like what you can or can't do with those resources, right? And that gets us to the next layer, which is life skills. Now I know that's getting a little small there, but the idea is that if your athlete lacks certain life skills, no matter how much resources you have, time, energy, or money, to improve your physical, technical, tactical abilities, if you don't have really good life skills, well, then that all falls apart. Okay. Now this is where so I got a question from a mom asking me, and this was what kind of spurred this topic today, in addition to the Olympics. But the idea was like, dear Jonathan, my daughter is a figure skater, and two of her biggest inspirations have been Naomi Osaka and Sky Brown. Sky Brown's a skateboarder, and I had done a video on YouTube about Sky Brown last year, and I don't think she's competed. I think maybe she did compete, but the idea here is that so this mom writes, we're a mixed race family too. Right. So Sky Brown is mixed. Naomi Osaka is mixed. But my daughter's having trouble recently because her coach feels Naomi Osaka basically quit on tennis. My daughter is quite quiet and introverted. She's definitely not the loudest one in her club, but we are having trouble as parents trying to help her find a balance so she doesn't get burnt out. Would love your thoughts on this, Cecilia F. from Ontario, Canada. Now, I realize as I read that now, Cecilia asked me like two different things, but anyway, we'll continue. The idea here is that did Naomi Osaka quit on tennis? Sort of. What I think Naomi Osaka did here is she wished that things were easier instead of her being better, even at the highest level. But this is what I want to talk about today: is that even when an athlete has what Naomi Osaka lacked in this situation is life skills, right? She lacked the life skills to supposedly deal with the media and deal with whatever. And so the final layer, just to finish this off, is belief. So belief in your life skills, belief in your resources, belief in your abilities. Okay. So what happened here is that um, so Naomi Osaka, um, instead of persevering, but instead of coming out and saying, you know what, I really don't like these press conferences. They ask me stupid questions. Um, they bring doubt into my head, and that didn't just happen all of a sudden. It's probably been going on for a while, and she doesn't like it. But this is what people aren't really talking about: is that for athletes like Naomi Osaka and Simone Biles and Michael Phelps and LeBron James and you name it, they are now bigger than their sport. Okay. It used to be that sports birthed athletes, but now that happens to a degree, but then the athlete quickly rises above. Why? Because your daughter or your son has a social media account and they're following that athlete on Instagram, and your athlete now has another vehicle with which to draw a crowd, to draw eyeballs. Whereas it used to just be, the only way that you could have access really to that athlete, to that role model, was to see them compete and then see them do the press conference and then see them on an ad for Coca-Cola or Cheerios or Wheaties, right? So the sport made the athlete. That's changed now, whereas athletes are like now bigger than their sport. And so what that brings to the sport, which is very weird for a lot of people, is that it now changes the cost benefit decision. So Naomi Osaka is the highest paid female athlete in the world, okay, regardless of sport, not just tennis. So, she's at the French Open and she deals with this press conference and she's like, you know what? Screw this. I don't want to deal with that. I'm not dealing with that. And so she walks away, probably not really knowing the rule, right? Not really knowing that she's going to get fined, not really knowing that she could get disqualified, because no one's ever really had to cross this bridge before. Maybe occasionally like some athlete makes has a bad day and puts up his middle finger to the press and says, yeah, I'm not talking to you guys today. And then the tournament goes like, okay, blah, blah, here you go. You're done. We're going to fine you 10 grand. Make sure you do the next one. They're like, yeah, whatever. Okay, fine. But now what happens is that those elite athletes, and even Simone Biles, like in the last couple of days, has just gone, you know what? All right. In Simone Biles' case, what she's told the media is that she wasn't there mentally. So she just said, okay, I'm done. So people are like freaking out, which they should, because here's what happens. In a sport like gymnastics, on one end of the table, you can have someone like Simone Biles who's making millions of dollars. And on the same table, you can have on the other end, you can have another athlete who's barely scraping by. Like, I can't remember the name of the girl, but her family basically put her like on a plane and she flew all around the world to compete in gymnastics competitions, just to earn enough points where she became like this. I can't remember the term, but she had enough points to make the women's Olympic team. So they had the resources to do that, right? They had the resources to make that happen. So she did it. But on that table, you can have an athlete earning millions of dollars and you can have another athlete trying to spend whatever they can to just get on the team. So that's when Simone Biles quits, when she says like, no, I'm done, I'm not competing. and people go like, well, that's selfish. There's some truth to that. Okay. Because not only did she take up a spot on the team, but so that some other girl could have had even as an alternate, right? But the thing that nobody is talking about here is the idea that in the last Olympic Games, when Michael Phelps retired, and I can't remember who the other athlete was that retired, Summer Olympian, Simone Biles was quickly tabbed as the face of the Tokyo Olympics in 2020, right? So from a marketing and business perspective, Simone Biles had 4 years to just it's like a running back in the NFL who's got a couple years to make it rain, and he does it, and then he's done. Okay. Now, the other thing that I heard, which was kind of interesting, and this will piss a lot of people off when I say this. So Simone Biles talked about how she was the last of the Larry Nassar victims, the survivors that was still competing and made it to the Olympic Games. And she took that as kind of a cross to bear and did it. But I'm here to tell you that when you're vengeful of something, that is energy that only lasts for so long. Because at some point, you can get to a point and you're like, I'm tired of fighting that fight and I'm done. It's not sustainable, right? That energy kind of dissipates. And I heard that from her in an interview. And I thought, isn't that interesting? So now again, to my quote of be curious, not judgmental. I'm not being judgmental of what she did. I'm just curious as to like, okay, was this an option? Was the idea that, okay, I got 4 years, I'm the face of the games, I gotta get to Tokyo. Oh, dang it. Now COVID, I gotta wait one more year. I'm curious if she didn't plan this all the way along. This idea that she was going to get to the games, she's going to be the face, she's going to compete. And what we saw was not pressure getting to her, but just this almost this relief that she was done. And what I think every elite athlete will tell you is that sometimes when you're not, you can be stressed on one side of the equation where you're just like, this is like you're trying too hard, and it's like your expectations are out of whack, and you're not doing very well, and you wobble, which is what happened to her, right? She didn't score very very well, like, and then, but the other side of that is also where you're not really focused. You don't really have the energy for it. And I'm curious if that was one of the approaches here, because from a marketing perspective, if you bow out at this point as the Olympian, the face of the games, you're injured, you don't want to risk your physical health and your mental health, so you back off and you turn around and support your team, that looks amazing. Okay? So before you get upset at me saying that, think about this, because when they did the qualifying, the United States was kind of looking like they were going to be second fiddle to Russia. Well, you know what? Right now, with the way that the world is about mental health and depression and all this stuff, man, everybody's like, I support Simone. Like, she's going out on this massive wave. But athletically, from a performance standpoint, it leaves us with a lot of questions. Going like, okay, all right, if your expectations are out of whack, that's on you. But as a seasoned Olympic vet, greatest Olympian in history, or greatest gymnast in history, that doesn't really kind of fit for her, does it? Right? It's kind of like Tom Brady getting to his like 8th Super Bowl and going like, no, you know what? I'm going to let the backup compete because you know what? The pressure just got to me. As an Olympian, as a coach, the way I heard all this stuff in the media and in the press conferences and stuff, it just sounded really easy to me. And when they asked the athletes, like, how did you feel when Simone bowed out? Just the shifting of gears from like, oh, at first we were like kind of freaking out. And then we were like, we're kind of cool with it. Really? Doesn't sound to me like a team that was like, she was like the anchor. It was kind of like, okay, we're ready for this. And so now we kind of knew it was coming. So that's not going to make the media. No one's going to talk about that. But from a coaching standpoint, kind of makes a lot of sense. From a marketing standpoint, from a business standpoint, setting yourself for your future after the Olympic Games, it's better to have bowed out under these terms than to have like crashed out and finished third and, gotten bronze medals and everything you did, if that were in fact the case. So, um, so Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka are at that level. They are at that upper echelon where they can just go, the cost of competing in the games no longer reaps the benefit. So for Naomi Osaka, it was like Wimbledon. She's, supposedly she earns like $50 million a year. Now, I'm not judging who makes what amount of money and what's good for who. I'm just curious as to the fact that for someone who is introverted and is like, wow, this is amazing, got all sorts of money. I don't need to compete. I don't need to do that event. I can skip that one, go to the next one, whatever. Whereas that's okay at that level. But for an athlete who is just trying to come along and trying to make the team, they don't have that choice. Right. So when people now are going like, oh, I support Simone. Do you? Like, for what? For bowing out for her mental health. Okay. Would you allow your athlete to do that? Probably not. You'd probably encourage them to like, dude, you're this close. Go for it. Right. So there's a lot of confusion around this. And mentally, there's a lot of things that just don't really add up here. Okay. Um, so when athletes are bigger than the sport, right? And this hasn't ever happened before. This is now it's only going to get worse, or better, whichever way you want to look at it. But with the NCAA, with the NIL rules, and athletes like high school kids signing $1 million contracts, like marketing contracts, just changes everything, right? So now you're going to have athletes that look at the sport and go like, I'm not doing that anymore. So that brings us back to the tennis thing and the interviews and the press conferences. The idea where, okay, I'm all for media not asking like weird invasive questions. You think of like Sha'Carri Richardson being told by some news reporter that her biological mom died. That's weird. Or I told the story about in Formula One, where Alex Albon, who drove for Red Bull back in 2019, 2020, his mom was from Thailand, was in prison for like 7 years. But he had a Red Bull media person with him when they sat down with a British paper, and the media guy got in front of him and said, "You're not asking him about this, X, Y, and Z." And the media dude was like, but I got a job to do. And they're like, no, we're not going to deal with that. When you have that clout, when you have that weight, you can do that. When you are some up and coming athlete who's trying to get sponsors and get media and get eyeballs, you're going to have to deal with those questions. Now, maybe your mom didn't spend 7 years in prison for fraud, or your biological dad, mom just died, whatever. But you have to learn those skills to navigate that. You've got to be ready for everything, right? Because the athlete who's ready for everything is going to get ahead the furthest. And what Naomi Osaka really did, where she kind of fell out of favor to me as a role model, is like your athlete can look at her as like, okay, a role model in certain parts of their life. Like, okay, you like her technically, like how she plays tennis. Maybe you like her physically, maybe how she plays, or how she looks. Because a lot of people have related to her fact that she's like of mixed race and she's of Japanese heritage and those sorts of things. Like that's okay, that's cool. But quitting, that's where from an athletic perspective, that is no longer a role model in my book. I may appreciate them physically, but at this point, it's unfair to an up and coming athlete who doesn't have those resources, doesn't have those sponsorship dollars to go all of a sudden say, right, I'm out of here. I just don't feel like answering those questions. So I quit. Dude, you get kicked off a team so fast, right? You might never get that chance again, right? And that's really important to understand. So what we're witnessing is athletes bigger than the sport. Now, I hope that tennis. So what tennis did was all the four majors basically stood by this thing that, hey, listen, we're finding people and they may be at risk of disqualification. Now, what ends up happening is that that is the rules of the game, right? So the rules of the game is we play between the lines, we hit the ball back and forth, and we have rules there. And afterwards, we're gonna do, you're gonna win, I'm gonna lose. We're gonna go to the press conference, we're gonna do our interviews because that drives the sport. I don't like athletes who act selfishly and demand the sport to change in the short term for their benefit because the sport will be around long after they're gone, right? So an up and coming athlete is going to learn from this, realize that an athlete like Naomi Osaka, she quit there. She quit the French Open. She quit Wimbledon. She decided I'm going to show up in Tokyo, and this is interesting because some athletes do that, right? I remember when Lance Armstrong first came along in the Tour de France. Now, regardless of what you think about Lance Armstrong, the point was that he came up in a generation where athletes decided that I'm going to focus on the tour because I'm going to make the most money. I'm going to get the most exposure out of winning that event, not trying to do all of the other cycling races, right? When they quit, I lose respect for them. Yeah, that's true. Good comment. The idea here is that they, so now athletes go like, okay, well, I'm gonna compete in this one, but I'm gonna rest for that one, and I'm gonna put all my eggs in basket for that one. That's okay. That's a valid approach. But if you lose, and so Naomi Osaka just bowed out of the Olympics, I'm really curious to see where this goes. All right, I'm really curious to see where this goes. What we're basically seeing is athletes saying, "I will do this, but I won't do that." And when I talked about the concept of when values and performance collide, athletes work their way up the food chain, and they're making value choices all the way. All right. Oh, I've got to travel to this event. It's a 3-hour drive. We can't do that. That's a value choice. All right. Oh, I got to move my kid cross country to work with a better coach. I can do that. That's a value choice. I'm involved in this sport, and it's kind of becoming obvious that guys are like doping. I've got to either decide that I'm going to dope or not. It's a value choice, right? And if you think that's not a choice, look at like Olympic weightlifting, or cycling or things like that, right? And I get it. There's WADA and all that stuff, but really, seriously. But there's value choices all the way. Naomi Osaka, I'm done dealing with journalists asking me stupid questions at press conferences. Okay, well, we're going to fine you 15 grand. All right, good. Oh, well, no, we're going to disqualify you. Yeah, okay. That's cool. I'll come back for the next one. Right? Those are value choices versus a performance. So, what can we take away from all this? Your athlete can have role models in their abilities. Your athlete can have role models in their it's hard in the resource side, but parents can have role models in the resource side because they can get inspired to grow a company or get a new job or take a risk, do something new, start a side hustle, whatever. But the idea here is that at some point, a lot of times your athlete will then disappoint you. And I think Naomi Osaka disappointed a lot of people. And I think right now, Simone Biles has disappointed a lot of people. Now, a lot of those people are disappointed because they have no damn clue about what it takes to be an elite athlete. They can blame her for like quitting because she was selfish, and there is some truth to that, okay? But that is not the entire picture here. What we're witnessing is athletes that are, the Olympics is not what it used to be. It's the same as if you see a professional basketball player who doesn't go to the Olympics. Growing up, the Olympics was the thing. It was like there was professional hockey, professional baseball, professional basketball, and they want to go to the Olympics. But now the professionals are like, yeah, we don't really want to do that. We just kind of want to take those 2 weeks off and rest so we can come back. Right. So that's what we're witnessing. All right. So have those conversations with your athletes in terms of what role models they follow. You don't have to be 100% disappointed in your role model once something goes south. But the truth is that they can, you also, again, be curious, not judgmental. I know a lot of people will go like, oh, I'm never gonna watch another tennis match with Naomi Osaka in it. Really? Because as a coach, if you're working with a tennis athlete, you can learn a lot from that. It's like, oh, that that lifter tested positive for steroids. I'm never gonna watch that guy again. Really? You could probably learn some really good technique stuff from them, right? You might not make that same value choice that they do, but the truth is you can still learn. So be curious, not judgmental, says Walt Whitman and Ted Lasso. Apple TV. Binge watch it all. You'll love it. All right, moving on. Where'd my pen go? 105.23. All right, moving on. Last one. Did I do my banner? Did I do my banner? It's always a bit of excitement when I click through things and wonder if my banner is still there. All right. So we're gonna delete that, remove that. All right. The hard truth from coaches is not what you want, but what you need. All right. So I've been really man, over the last couple months, a lot of this talk, a lot of talk about mental health and abusive coaches and things like that. It just seems to always be in my wheelhouse. And my friend Warwick Bashford on Facebook. So if you look for Warwick Bashford, you can find him and send him a friend request. Tell him I sent you. He is a tennis coach, tennis instructor down in Florida. And he's a lot like me, where there's a lot of coaches out there that drive big businesses of coaching, and they're really selling, they're selling a product. And for a lot of the parents, they are uneducated consumers. And for the athletes, they are definitely uneducated. They'll just buy, they're just buyers. They buy anything. New camp, new clinic, new event, they'll take it. And he wrote a fantastic post this last week that really needs to turn into a blog post. But the idea is that a lot of parents who work with athletes, they are, and Warwick goes to this great hierarchy of decision points, which is fantastic. But the idea is that a lot of parents are making the wrong choice for their athlete. They're looking for like playing time. They're not interested in technique. They are a little bit, but not enough to like demand that their athlete grind it out through practice after practice, learning technique, to have a plan of development. And what's interesting is like every sport will espouse like how they follow long-term athlete development programs, which are really just, unfortunately, they've been totally bastardized. My friend Richard Way, who I knew from my time on the board with Luge Canada, he's involved with the creator of long-term athlete development, Dr. Ishvan Bali, Balyi, who created it. And then, the thing is that now every sport is like, hey, we've got long-term athlete development, but it's for our sport. And so you're welcome. Is that Marge? I can't tell who that is. Thanks, John. Got some interesting points of views. Good job. All right, thanks. The thing that is really interesting here is that when a coach comes to you and gives a critique, it never feels great, right? It never feels great unless the athlete is completely committed to improving. And when an athlete hears something from a coach, whether that was directed at the athlete positively or negatively, if it was critical of the athlete, if the athlete takes it personally, to me, that's a sign of an athlete that's not really focused on being really, really good. They're still really concerned about their feelings. They're not taking that information and going like, okay, I'm going to take that, I'm going to process it, I'm going to turn that into this thing, and that's going to get me this result. And then so then they go like, but coach told me this, and that made me upset, and now I feel sad. And then you go to the parents, oh, coach said that, and it made me feel sad. And the parents are like, well, we're out of here, we're done. So I'm very critical of like club coaches and things like that who are not developmentally positive. They don't believe in progression. I don't really particularly care for coaches who say like, so I had this week, I had a Division I coach told this athlete who was going to graduate 4 years from now that they won't be a D1 athlete. I'm like, you know what? There's 4 years for you to you can transform a kid like in 6 months, let alone 4 years. And when coaches say that, they try to predict the future. I'm like, that coach is not really someone who's gonna, when a coach tells me what I can't do versus what I could do, we got to kind of move on. but I also don't give permission to my athletes and my parents just to say like any coach that gives you some sort of negative critique is worth discarding, because that's not true, and that's the point of this. So, um, one of the things that was really interesting as I was researching all this Naomi Osaka information was this idea that so Naomi Osaka, she worked with a coach, a German coach, and in 2 years he took her from kind of 75th in the world to like winning. She won two Grand Slam titles, or two, yeah, two Grand Slams, and then she fired him. And one of the things she was quoted as saying years before was she like wanted a coach that would tell her directly to her face what she needed to do to improve. So she was in that mindset of like, I just want to know, what I need to do to improve. I always tell people like I was a goalie in pretty much every sport I played and an Olympian in a timed event. Just tell me what I got to do, right? And then I'll do it. I'll try it at least. And that worked really well. So she was looking for a coach that would just tell her to her face. But then later she ended up firing that coach because she said it was clear to her that this coach was more interested in success versus her happiness. Interesting, right? So you bring a coach on, and coaches are designed, they are wired to win. Like coaches are wired to put all the pieces together so that they can take a team or take an athlete and do what they can to win in the moment. And so some people would describe that as winning at all cost. Well, certain situations, it's worth winning at all cost in order to then, once you get this event done, then you have time to heal. Right. So I think of like Carrie Strug at the Olympics in '96 in Atlanta when she vaulted and they weren't quite sure if they were going to win the gold or not. The Russians were still on another apparatus. And so she, very famously went down, did her vault, landed, kind of fell, like landed, like, and then she, Bella Curley was like, you can do it. Right. She goes back, she does it again. And she lands. Remember, she's hopping on one foot and she wins the gold and everybody's going crazy. They win the gold, the team gold. They're on the covers of the Wheaties box. It's all good news. Carrie went off and, was a speaker and everybody was happy, right? She didn't get to compete in the individual events, but the thing was they had their gold, right? So that's cool. So you make these decisions in the moment. Coaches are wired for that. So I found it really interesting that Naomi Osaka went from finding that coach that then got her to the next level and then parted ways. Now, the interesting thread there was this idea that when a coach takes you from like 75th to now best in the world and you're earning millions of dollars, that coach is usually up for a raise. And so people accused her of like cutting ties because she didn't want to pay him. Interesting, right? Again, curiosity, not judgmental, but maybe it was true, maybe it wasn't. But the point is that sometimes a coach will tell you what you need, not what you want to hear, like not what you want. You don't want to hear. Even when you are expecting them to tell you the truth, they tell you the truth, and then that stings a little bit. It hurts, and so um, that's where the relationship with your coach is most important. What happens a lot of times is if a family is moving an athlete from program to program to program, is they don't have enough relationship with the coaches with which to like develop like rapport and history. A lot of club coaches this year seem to be like getting an athlete, and then the first day they just want to change them. That's dumb. Okay. And so part of it is the parents' fault, part of it's the athlete's fault, but also part of it's the coach's fault. But the idea is that inherently the relationship between a coach and an athlete actually falls in kind of an abusive category. And I've talked about this a little bit before, but I did some Googling and I came across the Canadian Women's Association because I live in Canada and it comes up first. And I thought I would read this to you because it's kind of interesting. So um, this was the Canadian Women's Foundation. So signs of emotional abuse. Okay. Because one of the things that I find really interesting is when people talk about coaches being emotionally abusive. And I'm like, okay, I get the weird ones, right? And maybe I can pull this up here. Let me just try to pull this up so you guys can see it. It's kind of cool. Because again, I was just kind of Googling this kind of casually and here it came. So signs of, oh, that's on my face. Signs of emotional abuse. Boom. All right. Let me try to do this so you can see it. All right. It says emotional abuse can be difficult to identify because of the subtle and varied forms it can take. And things that are emotionally abusive are sometimes explained away as loving behavior. So I get that, I've weighed in on some conversations about gymnastics coaches who were labeled as abusive, and especially after the Larry Nasser case. I wasn't trying to be coach centric or like for coaches and anti-athlete. That was my point. But my point was just kind of bringing up the point, like, all right, sexual and physical abuse aside, all coaching is somewhat emotionally abusive, right? And it all depends on the person receiving the coaching. Um, and so, but again, it's very subjective, as this, as I found in this definition, which is kind of interesting. But like, so all the terms and issues can be confusing, but the signs and effects of the abuse can be clearer. According to the Department of Justice, emotional abuse happens when a person uses words or actions to control, frighten, or isolate someone, or take away their self-respect. Now, as I dug deeper into this, I started realizing that a lot of coaches use these techniques as a way to, it's almost like a last straw, right? It's like I've tried to do everything with you to get you to be better, but they quickly turn to the more negative things. So calling you names, making patronizing comments, publicly embarrassing you. Now that's an interesting one, because as an athlete, I always say this, like, as athletes, we go out every day and embarrass ourselves. Like every Olympian you see who, I was watching diving. I was watching synchronized men's diving today, and some dude, I think he was from Greece, uh, jumped off the board, got weird with his feet, landed pretty much like feet first as opposed to face first or head first, and he got like 0 points. That's embarrassing. Okay, so we embarrass ourselves. But now coaches can embarrass you, and I get it. It's a little bit different, but making jokes at your expense, which may also include dismissing any hurt feelings you incur as being unable to take a joke. I get told that all the time. Like, I'm a pretty serious guy. Like, I'm an only child, didn't have any brothers or sisters. I'm kind of a straight shooter. Like, um, I don't find jokes funny sometimes, because although I love humor, right? But the interesting thing is that is that coaches make jokes occasionally, right? Belittling your accomplishments, right? Like, hey, yeah, you did that, but whatever, not that big of a deal. I've heard people say that to Olympians. Oh yeah, you got the world record, but or you got the Olympic record, but you didn't get the world record, right? Jeez, whatever. Um, Making insults about your appearance. This is an interesting one, because in sports like figure skating, gymnastics, diving, we always talk about like clean lines, right? The athlete has clean lines. Well, if the athlete puts on 20 pounds over the summer because they ate a lot of ice cream, those lines aren't clean anymore, right? So where's the line there, right? It's usually in how it's delivered, right? But making insults about your appearance, what's insulting? Like, um, you know, now if someone calls you a fat cow, that's a different deal. But the idea is like, hey, as a coach, it's like, listen, from a strength to weight perspective, if when you were 142 pounds, you performed better than when you were also like 162 pounds or 115 pounds, because some athletes go that direction, and that's not good either, right? Um, Insulting or trying to control your clothing, hairstyle, or any physical changes. Man, um, I've never coached this category, but I ran into a bunch of girls who were synchronized swimmers. And I took my son to a birthday party at this place we used to call it the Talisman Center in Calgary. It's this beautiful indoor facility, has big pools and indoor courts, and it's a beautiful building. And so my son's going to a birthday party, and there was a synchronized swimming event, and there were these girls next to their party, and they're probably all like 13, 14 years old, and they're all gelling their hair. And literally, it's like they're shellacking their hair because they go in the water and their hair has to stay in this like ponytail thingy. And I remember talking to the mom about, because I'd never seen this, and she's like, "Oh my god, yeah, it takes." And she turns and she looks at one of the girls and she goes, "You look horrible. Like, get over here." Well, like, the coach is trying to. It's all about like appearance. So is that insulting or is it coaching? Again, your line. Um, Infantilizing you or acting as though they know what's best for you. To me, that's kind of coaching in a nutshell, right? Like, the coach is the leader, the coach is the elder, right? They have the knowledge and they're molding and mentoring an athlete. Just interesting. Okay. Um, this last one was kind of funny. Deliberately putting you in physically or emotionally uncomfortable positions. And I thought, that's pretty much every athlete that jumps off a high bar, tries to balance on a balance beam. Or now I get it. They add to this thing such as locking you out of your home or making a scene in a social situation. Um, I've had people that I've had people like coaches who have yelled at me. Now again, that doesn't make it right, but the thing is, I know a lot of coaches that will just like come on, like focus, like get like that could be considered abuse, like just saying something along those lines. Um, Question here, comment here, and that is a problem that coaches are limited in how they are allowed to coach. You cannot push your athletes to the limit anymore because everything is very quickly being called abuse. Some athletes react to the harsher way of coaching very positively. Yeah, that's totally true. And again, amongst my elite coaches who aren't dicks, right? Like and a dick is a very technical term. I understand that. But that's kind of where we're at with this, right? Is that a lot of elite coaches, and I should have added this, and I was going to talk about this in the last segment. This seems to be driven in North America, primarily the US, into Canada, and then into the UK and Australia, like English speaking nations. And also that comes from the gymnastics side of things because all those federations, I think the UK and Australia, in addition to the US, was so bad, right? The US had the Nasser case, then it was the UK, then it was Australia. I'm not sure Canada has had a couple. Canada's had a lot of issues in junior hockey with abusive coaches, like sexually abusive coaches. Weird. But it's changing. This next one's kind of interesting though, which was this gaslighting and manipulating section. So in a healthy relationship, your feelings, thoughts, and perceptions of reality will be validated. While disagreements arise in all relationships, including healthy ones, your feelings should always be validated regardless of what the other party intended. And this is where I think a lot of coaches miss the boat. And I know I probably missed this a lot when I was, especially when I was younger. This idea when an athlete, if they tell you, they're like, I'm scared. Okay. So a lot of coaches will be like, oh, no, no big deal. And they just brush it off and they keep going. That's where you have this moment of saying like, well, why are you scared? What are you thinking about? Because when we ask those questions, and I do this a lot with mental performance school, when we ask those questions, we can then find where the brain's going. Like, what are they focusing on? What are they thinking about? Right? That's a big deal, right? So this one was always interesting. So gaslighting. Gaslighting refers to the act of undermining another person's reality by denying facts, the environment around them, or their feelings, which pretty much includes like everything. Um, Targets of gaslighting are manipulated into turning against their cognition, their emotions, and who they fundamentally are as people. You know, I remember listening to Jack Canfield. Jack Canfield, who wrote the book called The Success Principles. This is the first place I heard this. We talked about yellow alerts, right? And he talked about like athletes, even and my friend Steve Harris, who's a police officer in Calgary, and he actually is involved with a safe sport consulting organization that he's created. Talks about like there's people who are groomers, right? Like in the most horrific sexual abuse cases, there's people who groom someone for years. But even within those grooming situations, there are yellow alerts where people go like, I never trusted that guy, right? I always thought that guy was a little weird. Well, what'd you do about it? That's kind of the question. But people say like, well, that's gaslighting. You can't go back and just like whatever. Like, no, listen, we're not trying to shame a person, just like Gabor Mate talked about. Like, you should not, a person is not, you shouldn't be ashamed of yourself. But if you do something that could have warranted a different result, you should feel shame about what you did. And so I always tell my athletes, if people saw like, I was told, or I was called out in this, YouTube comment that I made that, oh, you're victim shaming. And I'm like, well, wait a second. I think as athletes, you know, the worst thing you can tell anybody is that you're a victim, right? Like, because then it's like, oh, if they're a victim, then they have nothing to fix. But the idea here is that I always think as an athlete, like, we're a victim every day. Well, we try something and it goes well, great. If it doesn't go well, we're a victim of that result. Well, we can choose to either, change, and we do it again. We go back into that situation and we realize, like, okay, I'm a victim as much as of the mistake that I had control over. That's it, right? Like, and so at that point, the athlete has the choice. They can either make a change or decide to, like, just keep going ahead and going, like, nope, wasn't my fault. Well, you'll quickly understand. Like, the scoreboard or the clock will tell you how good that's going, how well that's going. Um, Another kind of topic here on gaslighting and manipulation when it comes to coaches. And this, again, this is about, like, coaches giving you the information that you need, not necessarily the information that you want. Okay. So this idea of defining and trying to exert how they think you should feel. Well, again, that's kind of coaches. Like, we're trying to get an athlete to a point where they feel courageous, right? So if they feel like, if they have a lack of confidence, if they feel weird, well, we don't want them to feel weird, right? So again, kind of falls in this category of a little bit of abusive. Dismissal of your feelings as crazy, dramatic, overreacting, or emotional. This is an interesting one because as coaches, let's say you're coaching a group of athletes, right? Or let's say you're coaching one athlete in an event. So swimming, for example, right? You watch the Olympics and you see the coach in the stands and there are athletes in the pool, and there's 8 other athletes or 7 other athletes in the pool. And if one athlete comes out of that pool and says, like, oh man, I felt so much pressure, and you finish 5th. Well, 4 other athletes were dealing with the same pressures, right? Or, I remember hearing, like, I've been around athletes who were technically, I would say they were crazy. And a coach said, no, you're crazy. You shouldn't, and so is that abusive? Well, probably, yeah, according to this, right? But are you telling the athlete what they need to hear or what they want to hear? Right? It's like, no, like, I remember having teammates where you're like, dude, you are certifiable. Like, you've got to get your head around that thought because it's not helping you or anybody. Okay. Refusing to take responsibility for, this is an interesting one from the coach's perspective, refusing to take responsibility for their actions or how they made you feel. They may try to frame everything, including your pain, as your fault. This is a tough one. So E plus R equals O, the event plus your response equals the outcome. So if a coach goes to 3 athletes and says, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, each one of those athletes may feel differently. I don't believe that it's the coach's responsibility to, like, a coach can tweak what they say in hopes that you take it the right way, but that only comes after a certain amount of experience. But I think of the Vince Lombardi quote that says, where's my notes here? I just have my notes up. This is a great quote. It is, fatigue makes cowards of us all, right? Fatigue makes cowards of us all. And I think what's really fascinating about that quote is that as a coach, it can tweak how it can affect what you say, but also as the athlete, if you're fatigued, if you're tired, if you're emotional, and a coach could tell you one thing one day, it could tell you the same thing another day, and you have a completely different response. It's not up to the coach to navigate that. They can't do that. You don't want them to have to spend that time trying to figure it out. We want your athlete to come and be a little bit more centered so that they can go, all right, I get it. Coach said this. Maybe also your coach is fatigued, right? That's another one. All right. So this last section I thought was kind of interesting, and I don't want to go too much further. Isolation and control. Healthy relationships involve both parties supporting one another in their respective interests, relationships, and goals outside of the relationship. Emotional abusers will often will work to make the relationship the most important thing in your life in order to isolate you from things that might threaten their control. Sounds like pretty much every Olympic coach I was ever around who said, hey, you got to come to the Olympic Training Center this summer, right? Demanding to know your whereabouts and who you are with at all the time. Sounds like drug testing and a WADA, what do we call those things? Those forms when you say, like, like those location forms. Basically, I'll let them know where you're going to be at all times, so they can just drop in on you and say, "Hey, we need a sample," right? Monitoring your communication channels, such as text messages or emails or social media. Like a lot of coaches will watch your social media to see what it is you're doing, right? Using technology or other methods to track your movements. Again, kind of goes to the drug testing thing. Making unilateral decisions for all parties, such as changing plans or creating joint bank accounts. Joint bank accounts, that's a little bit, but in terms of creating unilateral plans, it's like every team you're ever on. Withholding affection as a form of punishment. I've seen that before, right? You ride in the cargo van, right? The rest of the team gets to ride in the comfy van. You get to ride in the cargo van with Mickey, right? Coercing or intimidating you to spend all of your time with them. Sounds like every club coach or every club team my athletes are on. Isolating you from family, friends, and or coworkers. Sounds like the Olympics right now. Okay. So what I want to just kind of end on here is this idea that your coaches, you want to be seeking out coaches, just like Naomi Osaka was seeking out coaches who talked to her face and told her what she needed to improve. And that took her in 2 years from 75th in the world to one of the top tennis players in the world. Then she turned around and fired that coach because his focus was on success rather than her happiness. Happiness is a totally subjective thing, right? Your coach is not responsible for that. Only you are. But again, there's some interesting topics about, around happiness. This idea that, maybe our role as humans isn't to be seeking out happiness, but it's actually, putting ourselves into situations that are worthwhile. And I think as athletes, that's kind of fascinating, right? Got to be a German coach, remember? Yeah, sure. The point is that there are a lot of shitty coaches out there. Okay. But even with those coaches, the problem is rarely with what they know technically or what they know tactically versus how they deliver it personally. Okay. Our problems are rarely with the information that we get. It's more about how it's delivered and who they are as a person and how we manage that. So as parents, your job with your athlete is to help prepare them for those situations. You as an adult may have to learn some skills, some navigation skills, like personal skills with which to navigate others. You may need to learn how to be disagreeable or understand like where you sit on that spectrum from agreeable to disagreeable. Where are you? Right? Because a lot of coaches are very disagreeable people. It's what sport's all about. It's like, you put down a time, I disagree with your time, I'm going faster. Gymnastics. I love watching gymnastics at the Olympics because it's like some dude on the high bar goes like, whew, 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 and the other dude goes, I disagree with that dismount, and I'm going to go 4 rotations. I'm going to do 3 flips and land on 1 foot, right? Weightlifters. You lifted 140 kilos. I disagree with that. I'm going to lift 142 kilos. The coaches are all about that. They're all about helping you be disagreeable on the field of play. But they can have like the personality of a fish or a rock or a lion. But that's not their, and we can hope to maybe they manage it a little bit and whatever, that's great. And there's times when that's appropriate, but for the most part, realize, is what your coach telling you, regardless of how they're delivering it, what you need or what you want? And I can guarantee you that that 99% of the time, it's what you need. It's usually that 1% that offends you, makes you want to go to another club or another team or another state or whatever. Okay. So listen, everybody, that's it for tonight. I hope that your athlete has had a fantastic summer so far. If you're the athlete and you have listened to me all this tonight, especially my lacrosse families were still listening to me, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Do me a favor, share this with someone who needs to hear it. If you hear it on there's a couple things on the podcast. You can find Raising High Performance Athletes podcast. Go to athletespecific.com. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And by all means, if you got a question for me, you can email me, coachedwards@athletespecific.com. And when you're ready, check out mentalperformanceschool.com. All right, everybody, have a great night. I will talk to you soon. Bye now.